Welcome to Legacy Driven Marriages podcast episode number 35. It's time to get into the marriage arena and have some fun, have those candid conversations I hope you guys love and that are all meant to help you strengthen your relationship. I'm your host, Walt McKinley. As always, I am here with my beautiful wife and partner in crime, Stephanie McKinley.
Hey, y'all.
And as we get started today, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss an episode. I'm excited to get into this one today. Life's so busy now between jobs and kids and our individual interest and friends and family and social media and blah, blah, blah. So many different things. It can be really easy for relationships to start drifting apart. I mean, heck, we've been together 26 years, married 24. We've had our seasons where this has happened. And the crazy thing is, divorce is at an all-time high. Divorce rate is 52% in the United States. So it shows that it's really easy for marriages to drift apart. And then people really don't know what to do. They kind of give up on it, stop watering their own grass, and they allow their marriage to just dissolve. But here's the reality. We don't get married to get a divorce. That person that you fell in love with, that person that you said, I do for better or for worse, sickness or for health, sickness or in health, and, to spend the rest of your life with is still the person worth fighting for. But yet divorce continues to happen all around us. So what can we do? How can we really act with intention in our marriage to ensure that, one, hopefully we don't grow apart and end up a statistic, but two, if you're apart, what the heck can you do to bring it back from the brink of destruction and really focus on creating a healthy, happy marriage moving forward, where you get out of these crazy insanity cycles that we all find ourselves in sometimes, and you really move forward into a different type of marriage that communicates better, that really allows you to just truly be happy together and thrive together. So we're going to be talking about, what does it even look like when your marriage is drifting apart? And then, as always, this is a solution-oriented show. There's no reason for us to even be on here if we're not helping give you things that you can use right now to help your marriage and help elevate it. So we're going to give you those things and give you things that's deeper than just saying you need to go on a date night or vacation and reconnect. Because let's be real, when you're in that season and you kind of don't even like each other no more.
Get to that place, there ain't going to be no date nights happening.
And the date night definitely ain't going to end how you think it might. So we want to talk about things you can really do to get you to want to take that date night, and then be very intentional about staying connected in your relationships moving forward. But we also want you to know that you're not alone. Stephanie and I have been in this season in our own marriage at times, and really, you've heard us talk about it, been on the precipice of a divorce, one time especially in our relationship. And when you really get in that arena, when you really become the warrior for your relationship and you fight together to save it and make it the best it can be, it's beautiful of just how far relationships can come from almost literally giving up to being the best thing that ever happened to them and staying together until your last breath on this earth, which is, I think, what we all hope for when we get married. At least that's what I hope for.
Yeah, you guys, this is why we're wearing, if you can't see us on YouTube, we're wearing warrior shirts. And the reason we wear these is because we believe you need to fight for your marriage. And we know that it a lot of times requires fighting for your marriage. It's not easy. It requires real commitment.
And you got to get in the arena of your relationship. You can't be sitting in the stands watching your spouse fight for your relationship while you're just sitting there eating popcorn. It ain't gonna work.
Right. I like that Walt said, we don't focus on, it's too easy to just say, you know what, this isn't working, and throw in the towel, and divorce is always an option. But we like to think that divorce really isn't an option. You should never look at it that way. You should never go into your marriage thinking, oh, well, I can always divorce them if it doesn't work out. That's not what marriage was ever intended to be. That's why you take vows. That's why you're vowing that you're going to commit to this person for life. And that's why there's all those things in there for better, for worse, and all that. That's not in there for fun. That's in there because you're really going to face all of those things in your marriage.
And by the way, I just want to caveat that statement, Steph, before you keep going. We're not talking about if there's abuse whether it's substance abuse or whether it's physical or emotional abuse against somebody. We're not talking about those kind of situations where there's been something violated and a boundary crossed that you can't come back from. We're talking about specifically the 80-90% of percentages of marriage that just have couples that can't figure it out how to work better together and end up just quitting on each other and on their marriage and on their family and on the hopes and dreams that they started with. So I just wanted to caveat that up front. If you're in any type of abusive relationship, it's time for you to choose you and get out of there, or especially if you got children too.
Even in some of those, I think, don't just quit on that either. I think if someone does have substance abuse issues or something like that, help them, encourage them to get the help that they need, and encourage them the best you can to, because generally that's happening because there's deeper things that they haven't dealt with, and maybe you can be that person that helps them find that. But like you said, I mean, obviously, if it gets too abusive or something, then that's a different situation. But in all seriousness, all marriages are going to face a lot of hard things. It's inevitable. In this life, we're going to face hard things. Pain's universal. We're all going to face pain and things that, it's hard to get through on our own, let alone with someone. So that's why marriage is so challenging, is you are going to face things like death and, just having your kids is really hard. Career changes, all kinds of stuff. I mean,
selling and buying homes, losing money in the stock market, children, what are we gonna have for dinner? What time are you coming home from work? I mean, there's so many things meant to just disrupt, or that can disrupt your marriage, depending on where your head's at. That's for sure.
And we all just go through our own emotional stuff sometimes. Like, sometimes you just find yourself in a place where you don't even like yourself.
Yeah, no.
How's someone else gonna like you?
You're right. Where you're in this space in this season of just being uncomfortable, and maybe because you're getting ready to elevate and grow into this next piece of your own purpose and where you're going, and because you don't even like kind of what you're going through and you're struggling with your own emotions, that does spill over and affect your relationship with your spouse, when really it's not even about them.
I mean, honestly, we all go through periods of depression. Everybody has that a little bit. It's just some people are in it a lot longer. Some people really have a condition, like that's a medical thing in their brain, or, other people, it's like a loss of a job or something can make you depressed. You losing someone you love can make you depressed. I mean, there's so many things that make us go through that. And so we're all going to be there at times. And what's so awesome about marriage is that you have someone to share that with you. You have someone to lean on. You have someone that will be, that's the goal, is they'll be there for you in those times, because we're all going to have them. So the beautiful part of it is, you hope that when you go through that, your spouse is going to be your rock, or your, that thing you can lean on, and that shoulder you can cry on when you need it, and vice versa.
Sometimes it's both of you at the same time leaning on each other.
Right.
It's crazy, because Steph and I last night started watching on Netflix the show on longevity. They're looking at blue zones, people over 100 years old, and we watched one on Okinawa. And one of the things that they talked about was that people live a lot longer that are married. And you live a lot longer that are married. Although I know some of you guys struggling right now are like, my spouse going to be the death of me. So maybe you don't feel like it, but you really live a lot longer because you're sharing life with somebody. There's companionship. And even after one of the spouses die, they have like networks in these cities, and these groups of people get together, because community, especially the one that you have in your own home, really is important to creating just longevity and just overall happiness and joy.
We aren't meant to be alone. Loneliness will. That's what they've proven, is loneliness will kill you faster than almost anything else.
Well, you remember when I went to Japan? For those of you guys who don't know, that one point I went to Japan, I was stationed there. Steph and I weren't married yet. We knew we were going to get married, but we weren't yet. And so I had to go by myself.
Just were waiting on the...
Oh, yeah, that was right after we got married. It was right after we got married. Sorry. And so we had to worry about how she was going to get on the orders, and there's, government bureaucracy at how you do it. Well, she stayed behind for 8 months.
And you were waiting because you put in for an officer program, and we didn't know if you were going to get it, but if you did, you were going to get sent back.
Right. So you were there for 8 months by yourself, And you really got to see what it was like to truly be alone most of the time because you weren't close to your family. We had a couple friends and stuff like that, but we didn't have this huge network because we had only been.
We had just gotten an apartment by ourselves. We actually had roommates before that. We just got this apartment, and like, not joking, a month or two after we got it, he left for Japan. And the goal,
not happily, by the way,
was hopefully it would only be a couple months and he might get to come back. And if not, I was going to go out there. Well, it turned into 8 months. I was living in this apartment by myself
with our fish tank.
And I had no family around. I just moved from Connecticut down to Virginia, and my family was all up in Connecticut. So, and I had just quit my job because we just got in a position where, and I was going to school full time. And that's why I was like, well, I was just trying to finish my school because I only had 2 years left.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, I'm just going to keep going to school while this pans out. And it ended up long story, but he was picked up for the officer program, but then let go because of a medical thing. And they, so he was then stationed in Japan for 3 years. So I ultimately made the decision to leave and move with him.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, dang asthma.
So I had to pack everything up myself. But anyway, in that 8 months, that's the first time I'd ever truly been alone.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me very depressed, and I put on a lot of weight, and I realized, like, I told him from that point, I was like, I will never live by myself again.
Well, it's like, not saying you can't be by yourself for periods, right? But 8 months was a long time. And you almost kind of lost your fervor for life. You went into a light depression where, like you said, sure, you had gained weight, but you just weren't happy in general. And so when we got an opportunity for you to move to Japan, it was like, yes. And I missed you too. But the difference was I lived on the ship during that time frame with other people. So I wasn't really ever by myself. I went and played basketball every day with other people. I had social interaction. And I want to bring this to the first point with the signs that you're drifting apart, because it is really painful, especially when you live with somebody and they're supposed to be the person you love and they love you and you're their rock, but you don't even really sit and talk to your spouse. You don't even really care to talk to them because you don't feel like they care about you at all. And so it's tough to be by yourself, but it's really tough to live in the same home and still feel alone.
Yeah. Right. And we both have experienced this. Like we said, for us, this happened, like we said, there's different seasons, but the main season where this got really hard is after we had young children. And that's where, you don't get to connect in the same way that you were, because your children become in the middle of that, and you're having to hold them and take care of them, and you stop holding each other's hand, and you're not really spending as much time together. And so
you're changing diapers and wiping butts, and they need something every single second of every single day, and you're just damn exhausted. Meanwhile, you're supposed to be lovey-dovey and connect with your spouse, and that's
and to be honest, this was a time when, and I think a lot of women go through this, where I felt like I went through a postpartum depression. I couldn't have told you that then. I just knew I felt depressed after having my baby, and which is really hard to deal with this too, because you feel like everyone's looking at you like, oh, this is like one of the best times of your life. You should be so excited you have this new baby, and it's everything is supposed to be like rainbows, but it didn't feel that way. And I think
there's parts that were
right.
And then there's parts that were really hard.
Yes. I don't think anything could have prepared me for that transition. And there's a lot of physical, emotional, all kinds of stuff happening when that happens. I mean, you do have physically a crash of your hormones, and no one tells you about that. And also everyone's different. Your babies are different. And mine just happened to be very colicky. She never slept. Therefore, we did not sleep. And you know what happens when people don't sleep? You get very edgy and irritated. And, before you know it, you're snapping at each other. And it's not even because
it's worse than being hangry. Being tired is the worst. But I think that's part of it. The evolution. So you're in a home, like Steph said, especially shout out to you guys with young kids, man. You're in a beautiful but very tough season at the same time. One we very much empathize with you for. Yes. And I promise you it does get better if you really take some of these things that we talk about in these podcasts to heart. But I think to myself, the first emotion I started to feel when you and I were really struggling to connect because we didn't make dates a priority and we were just tired. I just missed you. I missed doing things with my spouse. I missed laughing. I missed having fun. I missed all those little things that we had all the time in the world to do before we had children, and that we were just almost too tired to do after we had them. And so I know some of you guys are in that season where you're just missing your spouse.
Well, I think that's part of it too, is there's like you're grieving your freedom. I was grieving my freedom big time. And I think that's a big piece of why I felt depressed was, whoa, I didn't know it was going to turn my life upside down like this. And it's very hard. I don't want to get into all of that, but there's so much to it that, and for both spouses, because the other spouse is also like, what happened to my spouse? And like, and for them, it changes too. So a different kind of change, and they're used to having all your attention, and you can't be there the same way. And
so some people need more attention than other people.
And there's a lot of guilt in there too. Like there's guilt for, you feeling like guilt for your kids, guilt for your spouse, guilt for yourself.
Right. Sadness around all of it. And I think that, and then we start lashing out. We start getting irritated and annoyed with our spouse, really more so because we're just hurt. We just miss our spouse. We love our spouse. I've heard people say, I just wish things were the way that they used to be. You're not the man that I met. Well, first of all, hopefully they're not. They're grown. But you say those things, but really those things come out of anger. And
to be honest, having kids does change you. It changes who you are.
Your priorities in life change, or they should. What you don't realize is that you still also need to prioritize yourself in your relationship. You just end up prioritizing the kids. And really, it's just you miss your spouse and you're not talking about it and you're not saying how you're feeling. And then you take it personal. Oh, they don't even want to be with me anymore. When really that's not it at all. They really do. You guys are just missing the connection. And this is a drifting apart that really affects so many relationships. And you will have this season, right, Steph? At one point or another.
And by the way, it's not just having kids. If you're someone who doesn't have kids and it's just, you've just been in the relationship a long time, sometimes this happens because sometimes you just fall into routine, or
it's monotonous sometimes.
Yes, it can get monotonous. Or sometimes it's your work, like your work takes precedence, or you spend a lot of time there. And so you don't see your spouse a lot. And so things happen there. I mean, there's lots of ways that can pull your relationship apart if you're not intentional with making it a priority.
And the struggle is, I think, when people go through that, this is another thing that shows we're kind of drifting apart. It turns all about, instead of we anymore, now it's me. I'm going to go do this. You don't even care anyway. You don't want to spend time. You're justifying your actions in these moments because of the hurt that you're in, because you're sad and because you miss your spouse, but you stop watering your grass and it becomes about you, not watering your front lawn. It just becomes about watering your half of the grass, and that's it. And it's all about what you want to do and how you want to do it and when you want to do it. Or maybe your spouse is doing this right now, but there's such a much deeper meaning to that, to what got you away from the we and the family and the connection to the me and selfishness that comes along with that.
Well, we know with us, with the kids, it becomes hard. Like you can't go do everything together anymore. Or it's not as easy at all, because you need a sitter, or, so a lot of times one would stay with the kids, one goes out, but then you're not doing the things together. So you really do have to prioritize making the time together, or it doesn't happen, because it's very easy to just be like, oh, well, it's too difficult to take care of. I'm just going to go do this on my own.
And you can't wait till the vacations, because Steph and I aren't big drinkers, but every once in a while we'll tip one back, like if we go out socially. And I felt like you and I, in those moments, we're kind of waiting for these big things, the macro things, like the vacation. Well, then there's so much.
We didn't even know how we were going to do that.
Remember we went to New Orleans with some friends, but there's so much like resentment and there's so much pain, and we had kind of drifted apart, that we thought this vacation was going to be this great reset for us, but it really wasn't. There were some things that came out during that vacation.
Especially if you drink alcohol.
But it's because we weren't doing the micro things. And we're going to talk about some micro things that you can do and some solutions, but we weren't doing the micro things to keep our relationship very positive and moving in the right direction, where the vacation really could have been that thing that just added so much to our love bank in that moment. We had let ourselves drift so far apart that we couldn't even see each other anymore. And then we're thrown together on this vacation and throwing a couple drinks too. And all of a sudden it's a crap show. And I know that there's a lot of people out there who you're waiting for this big moment, and then the big moment comes, and it's a big moment in a way that you didn't even think it was going to be. Not a good one. Because you're not doing the daily things that will keep you from growing apart too.
So we were talking about, I don't know if you guys caught this in there. You know, we've talked about a lot. So we were kind of addressing the signs you're drifting apart. These are just the signs when you are drifting apart, and we're going to get to the solutions of what you should do to repair that. So he was just saying, yeah, the last one was when it's all me and no we. Now we're talking about feeling like you're on different emotional planets, like something's missing. It's like you just can't seem to connect anymore. It's like,
and you can't put your finger on why.
Right. If you feel that, like, I know we were saying how just everything starts to feel disconnected, you know, like you said, you feel like you can't even talk to them because you feel like it's going to turn into an argument. They're not going to hear you. You know, they don't understand. So you just don't even talk about it. Everything, and every time you talk, you're getting annoyed and irritated. And so, you know, little by little, you just start going, it's just easier to do things by myself, or I'm just not even going to talk to him about it. And slowly but surely, you're drifting and drifting and drifting further and further apart. And it really gets to that point where you're just really like, you get to where you don't even know how to connect anymore.
Well, isn't it crazy? Because we talk about the micro things to keep things strong, but it's also the micro things that atrophy your relationship. It's like death by 1,000 paper cuts, where it's you might have an event that really shakes it up, but the event isn't the thing that got your relationship to that point. It's all the little things that were happening over the last year, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years that you guys weren't doing that allowed you to grow apart enough to where now there's this huge moment in your relationship, and everybody wants to point to that, but it is really the little things, the micro moments that
it is the little by little, because every time they did something that annoyed you and you didn't talk about it, then a resentment started to build. And every time it gets to where almost any little thing they're doing is now irritating you, and you're like, ugh, because you just never dealt with it when it happened along the way. You just let it build and build and build. That resentment built and built and built. Every time you didn't have a conversation about whatever it was that was bothering you, it becomes to where it's like, he sneezed and God, he's so annoying, you know?
chewing chips next to you, and you're like, oh my God, if they chew them chips one more time in my freaking ear, I'm gonna stab him in the neck. So,
And we know we got to this point where it was like the tension was so thick you could cut it with, it was like you could just feel that we could feel the tension with each other in the room, that we didn't even want to be in the same room anymore.
it's like the opposites attract in a magnet, but when it's the same, you know, you're putting a positive and positive together, they like repel each other. That's what it felt like. We're both going to get in the fridge, repel back against each other. Can I get you something, asshole? You know, and you might not even say it, but you sure do think it in those moments. Let's be real. And because you're not connecting.
By the way, I know this is really not funny, but it's funny to us now because we know how ridiculous it gets, to where you're like, when you look back on it, you're like, I can't even believe it was that bad, or we let it get that bad. And to where it's like, we can't even stand to be in the same room together because we're that irritated with each other. Like, how do you even get there?
But what's
neat, it is this little by little trickle. He always says it's a trickle, and it turns into a fire hose eventually, because, you know, like we said, it's a buildup.
But I think we can make light of it now only because we know that actually saved our marriage ultimately. We just didn't know it in the time. It was a really hard season for both of us. We genuinely had to just reconnect. Sex was more transactional. Definitely probably felt like more of a chore to you than a choice in some of those moments. And our whole marriage was going down in flames. And the reason we can laugh now is because we know that season in our marriage, that's what I want you guys to get excited about. If you're going through this and you're willing to really fight for it together, that your marriage can become incredible after these seasons and will become incredible after these seasons if you allow yourself to get really uncomfortable, have the conversations that you need to have, and then move forward together. It's the thing that you can reach back on later and say, damn, we really came a long way. We almost didn't make it, but we did. And now look at where we're at.
Yeah, honestly, I think Walt and I feel like that, even though we can look back on it and it's like, it was such a hard time. It was like the hardest thing we had to go through. But at the same time, it's also what made our relationship the strongest it's ever been. Because making it through that showed us that we can do hard things in our, hard things can happen to your marriage and you can still make it through them. So I want you to know that, because I know a lot of people feel like once certain things happen, there's no coming back from that, but that's not true. I think you can work through the hard things. You just have to have a willingness to do it.
Yeah, and you've never met anybody successful in a relationship that's been together a long time that hasn't shown the willingness to get uncomfortable and grow and change and adjust and compromise and be selfless and all of these things. You've got to be willing to do those things too. But so does your spouse. But I think you got to be willing to do it, because even if you can't work things out with your spouse, you're going to carry the same tendencies and the same baggage into your next relationship, and you're going to end up divorced again anyway. 72% of all second divorces end in divorce. Why? Because everybody thinks it was their partner's fault and nobody takes accountability for that. So I think that's a huge piece of this too, is either way, you got to do the work.
Yeah, it's something that, this is why I feel like this is a huge thing that it's driven Walt and I to do this podcast, to do legacy driven marriages, is because we almost feel like we have this secret weapon. Like, we know that we were in that place where it was definitely like, we understand divorce. We understand it. We understand how people get there.
Mm-hmm.
And we were this close to, like a millimeter from that happening. And we know that with the willingness to put work in, the willingness to take accountability, willingness to say, like, I'm committing. If you do those things, we know that if you do those things, you can save your marriage. And so I think that, just like, it's like, if we could just, we see it, like, we know what we went
Bottle
through.
it up and sell it to people as a drink, they'd be good.
Like, we know what we went through, and we've seen other couples who've divorced and moved on to other relationships, and we see it time and time again. It's because, like he just said, it's because, if you divorce and that was never resolved, you never really learned what it was that makes a marriage work. And then you go into another relationship doing the same things and expecting a different outcome. And there isn't going to be a different outcome just because you're with a different person. Even if that person's different, you're still going to fall into the same things, because marriage is marriage. Like,
Right. Even if you got different personalities within the marriage, all marriage struggles with the things that we talk about on this show. We've experienced some of them. We've seen a lot of them. And
you're still going to run into them, and you're not going to know how to deal with them. You're going to revert to the same way that you always did. And you're going to have the same outcome.
So let's talk about, okay, what the hell are you supposed to do about it now? Great. Thanks, Walt and Steph. You guys just made me feel horrible about my marriage, and we're definitely drifting apart. Or maybe you just really don't want to drift apart. You're in a good season and you want to keep that momentum going. I got to tell you guys, it's deeper than just date nights and vacations. We talked a little bit about that. We're going to get a little bit deeper on some of these things that you can do. And the first one is something I think that's one of the keys on almost every single show. Just, you got to communicate. Yes. You have to talk, and you got to be vulnerable enough in the conversation to not blame your spouse, but to let them know just how you feel. Because the night Stephanie and I had our deepest conversation, where you said we were a millimeter away, it would have been really easy for one of us to say, this is it, in that conversation. But because of the way that we talked about how we were frustrated individually, the things that we really wanted and needed from our partner, but each of us active listened to each other in those moments. And we were really raw with each other in those moments, but not in a blaming game way, but in a way that said, this is just how I feel in my core. But I do want to work on it. I do want to fight to it together. But if I wouldn't have active listened to what Stephanie needed and I would have just been focused on what I needed, well, guess what? Then I would have been trying to get what I needed without ever pouring back into her. And it really does take two to tango in this moment. And that goes for this conversation, that if you're in this moment and you're drifting, you have to have this conversation in your relationship. You cannot avoid this thing.
Well, yeah, don't be like us. We're the cautionary tale there.
Yeah.
We had to have a come to Jesus moment where it was really a do or die in our marriage, to where it was, we either have this conversation or there just going to be someone walking out.
Well, it was, we're going to be together after this or not. Right. That was really like,
it was black and white at that point. And it took getting to that to make us really have the real conversation and be active listeners for each other. Because honestly, we were definitely at that point where we stopped communicating because we felt like we weren't being seen and heard by the other person. Mm-hmm. So,
and we weren't.
Right.
Really.
We felt like, I can't talk to him about it because he's not hearing me. So why bother? And that's how it gets.
They're only worried about themselves.
Right. That's how it felt for both of us. Mm-hmm. And so what do you do when both people feel that way? That's why you drift apart. So it takes that someone either has to be the bigger person and just say like, hey, confront it and say, we need to have a talk about this. And this is how I feel. Or there's going to be a come to Jesus moment that makes you have that conversation. So secondly, we're going to talk about changing the way you communicate.
Yeah. While you're communicating.
That's what I mean by, we keep saying that communication keeps coming up. And I'm always saying, be specific about it, because I hate when people just say, just communicate, because that doesn't tell me anything. So if the previous way you were communicating wasn't working, you need to try a different approach. So we talked about this in some other previous episodes, but basically you can't come at your partner blaming them and saying, you do this all the time. And they're just going to be on the defense. And that's what we were doing to each other. We were coming at each other like, instead of just saying, this is how I feel, and putting it like, I feel hurt because of whatever A, B, and C, or I would really love if we did this. Instead of saying it that way, we were saying, you always do this, or you're making me feel, we were making it about them and blaming them and not taking accountability ourselves, or just saying, I feel this way, or I feel hurt.
Well, it's almost when you said you're putting them on the defense. Of course, I'm a dude, so I like the sports analogies, but it just makes me think, you're not in the middle of a game against an opponent. You're not on offense and your wife's on defense and you're trying to score on her. This is really more like a team meeting. This is a team meeting so that you can get the entire team moving in the same direction again. And so, for instance, when we had our conversation, I told Steph, I said, I still love you and I'm still in love with you. I'm just angry right now. I'm angry and I'm hurt. And, I'm a great father. I'm a good husband. And I feel like I'm just not getting what I need from you. But then I actually had to say what I did need. I couldn't assume she knew. But it wasn't, you're not giving me what I need. You're this, you're that. Again, that's offense. I'm trying to slam dunk on her head, right? I'm trying to score, put it all up in her face, celebrate. That's what so many of us do in arguments. And shit, I've done it in arguments with us too. I've just learned over time that is a total way to ruin that entire conversation that you're having. So stop thinking of it offense versus defense.
You're not trying to win the argument.
You're start thinking to have a team meeting.
Yeah, you're trying to win at having a healthy relationship, not win the argument.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but like you don't win, you win the battle, but you lose the war. You ever heard that one? And I Steph, I'll let you.
So I'm just gonna say, do you want to be right, or do you want to have a relationship? That's the question that we ask people, because some people just want to be right, and they're the ones trying to win the argument, and at all costs, they don't care if they wound, hurt, and whatever to their spouse. They just want to be right. Well, that's how you end up alone.
So and what's right anyway?
Right.
Just your perspective. That's all it is. allow them to have their own. And I think, Steph, you love this topic around self-awareness. The third one is, so you're going to communicate, you're going to change the way you communicate, understand how powerful your words are. And then you're going to take some personal accountability. Man, this one's really tough because it's so easy to blame. And there's so many people. I wish we taught self-awareness in school instead of algebra or geometry, right? Things that you're probably never really going to use. Self-awareness is huge to just having an amazing life in general, much less a marriage, much less being a parent, just in general. And the more we can take accountability and be honest enough with ourselves to own our shit, the better overall our life is going to be, and the better our relationships in total are going to be. And that self-awareness is something that it's not easy. It's easy to get your feelings hurt, and it's easy to, somebody says something and immediately you attack back because you're offense defense now. It's harder to just have a little bit of patience, active listen, and think, I've been walking around in eggshells lately. I've kind of been an asshole. Because Steph's told me that when I was stressed at work. Well, we feel like we're walking around on eggshells, and I'm like, of course I get all offended in the moment. Then I got to get reflective and say, there's some truth to that. I do got to own my pieces of that. And I got to try to be better. And I can't take stress from work out at home.
Yeah. I know it's never easy for anybody to hear criticism about themselves. It's not easy for anybody. But the best thing you can do is just take that in, not get defensive about it. I know it's very easy, and we all have it. Like, it's anytime someone comes at you with something critical, immediately you're going to be on the defense, and you're going to want to protect yourself and defend yourself and say, I don't do that. We all do it. So the best thing, if your spouse is telling you that they're something like that, and they're trying to tell you in a way that's, they don't want to necessarily, they're not trying to hurt you. They're just trying to make you aware so that you have a chance to change that and make it better. So you have to really be an active listener in those moments and just take it in and say, okay, like, you don't have to agree necessarily or anything. You just kind of take it in and reflect on it. And, you'll decide whether, ultimately you're going to decide whether you feel like there's something of value to what they're saying and you want to make a change, or you won't. But honestly, if they're telling you that, there's got to be a reason.
And if you're not willing to take personal accountability for how you've shown up in your relationship's going to end. You and your spouse really have to be on the same page when it comes to this.
Because whether you agree or not, that's how they feel.
Right? Yeah.
So you really do need to make some kind of adjustment, or you're going to keep hurting them. So you really do have to listen when someone tells you there's something that's bothering you. And maybe they're not saying it in the best way, but you should still reflect on it and think, like, maybe there's a way I can work on that or change that, or something I can do to where they won't feel that way.
And if you're the person talking to your spouse or your partner about what you need, talk about it in that way. Hey, I love when you do this, or I love when you do that. And by the way, ladies, men want to be the hero. That's how we're programmed in life, to want to show up and be the hero. So, oh, when you do this, it just makes me feel this amazing way. And I just love that. And I hope that you can do more of that. A guy's going to be like, yeah, baby, I got you, baby. I can do more of that for you.
You can never go wrong with praise.
I could do more of that for you. And really, it's just taking it from focusing on that negative that you want to see adjusted, to focusing on what they do really well that fills your bucket and enhancing that. So that's what we're talking about, is whether you got to own your own stuff.
Because there's been times when Walt told me, I have an issue with running late. That's like one of my biggest flaws. And I know I do. So, but he told me he feels disrespected when I do that. So I was like, never really thought about it like that. I guess I didn't really think about how it was affecting someone else. I just only thought about myself in that moment, right? So I had to sit back and think, well, I started to work on that and try to be more on time. So I just start getting ready earlier, or there are ways that we can, and like he said, with him, sometimes it's his tone of how he says something, and so it's like, you just have to take those things in and think about how you can work on that. And you're not going to be perfect, and your spouse isn't going to expect you to be perfect. But if they see that you're at least making an effort to change a little bit, that goes such a long way.
Well, you just said the fourth thing, Steph. Not even realizing you rolled right into that. So look, we talked about communicate, changing the way you communicate, growing some self-awareness, taking accountability, and then what Stephanie just said. Then you got to just really change. Marriage is truly about compromise. Marriage is truly about trying to be the best version of you for your spouse, which, by the way, means that you're showing up as the best. You're maxing out your own capability too. And although that's really hard when you're growing apart sometimes, committing to really changing and not trying to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect, but really making those moves and taking those steps every single day to be 1% better and working on those things that your spouse needs more of from you. When we did that together and we really owned our own stuff and then made a dynamic move to change, not perfection, just change, it really did like considerably change our marriage fast. And there were still times when we regressed a little bit and, you're climbing the mountain, you might slip back down, but you don't stop climbing and taking the next step. And it's just that continual movement forward that next thing you know, you're laughing about a struggle that you had 12 years ago.
Right. I think, I can't tell you how key, like, just for your spouse to see just some effort. If they can just see effort in you trying to, like, make small changes, like they can see that you're at least trying to be better about whatever it was you talked to them about. It goes a long way, you guys. I mean, a long way. Because we know it's not like you're just going to change overnight and suddenly you're going to perfectly be what we wanted.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the effort. We just want to see effort. Everybody wants that.
And by the way, but everybody wants their effort to be noticed. So when you see the effort being put forth in the things that you really needed from your spouse, tell them so that they know you see it and you're acknowledging it. Don't let your ego or emotion or anger get in the way where they've got to do this for 6 months straight without screwing up one time before I say that it's really changed. Or, hey, they how many times have you said you were going to change? And yeah, you do it for 2 weeks and then we're right back to the same shit.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that. But you don't know the one time that you really had these conversations and went through these 4 things is the time when they're really going to change, or the time when you've owned your shit too. And now both of you are changing. So
and
recognize it with each other.
Don't sit back and expect they're going to change, but you're not going to do anything.
Right. Like, you ain't perfect, just in case you needed to know that. Trust me, I used to think that I was. Sometimes I still do. I'm working on that.
Yeah, I got to say, and I think that's a lot of what happens is one person will start to make a change and the other person either doesn't notice or sits back like, oh, how long is it going to be before they mess this up or they stop doing it? And then they don't do anything. They don't change anything. They're not trying to work on it at all. Then it doesn't go anywhere because both people have to be accountable. Both people have to work to make changes. It can't just be one of you. You're a team, you're a couple. It's a marriage. Like, you have to work together and you both have to make changes.
Look, guys, where your mind goes, your energy flows. If you're looking for the mistake to happen, if you're looking for them to screw up, if you're focusing on all their negatives, if you focus on what they're not doing, then your marriage is destroyed before it even gets started. The only way to really have an exceptional marriage, one, embrace the times of challenge in your marriage for it to get better. Start focusing with gratitude for who they are. Talk about how they show up. Let them know what you need. Let them know when they actually do it. Start loving them like you want to be loved. And when you're both doing those things together and you're both pouring into each other together, then the power of what you create is something that other people want to emulate. So you've got a choice. Focus on all the negative or focus on the positive and being solution oriented and moving forward. Look, that's it for today, guys. I hope you really enjoyed this episode. This one was fun. Me and you probably, it's 44 minutes. We probably could have went for like 3 hours on this one right here. So look, guys, listen to this episode with your partner. I'm going to say it almost every single time. Let us help you open up conversations in your relationship that they may desperately need, or just conversations that you think, damn, this is a good reminder for us. That's why Steph and I still go to marriage conferences and we still do stuff like that, because we can always get better. Join the Legacy Driven Marriages community on Instagram and Facebook at Legacy Driven Marriages to stay involved with other couples fighting for their relationship and staying in the arena. And we're really excited to announce our website at www.legacydrivenmarriages.com. We built a website and we're still married and we didn't drift apart. Let me tell you what, that's a success in my book. So go on there. We're going to be putting out some blogs for the episodes and, workshops coming up, and we're getting ready to write a book and some other things. So go on there, sign up. I don't want you guys to miss out on anything. And, let's keep creating these powerful relationships together. So until the next time,
keep fighting for your marriage, keep loving each other, and keep elevating your legacy. See you next Tuesday.